Her name erased from the family Bible the day she was born. A Lakota chief carved it in wood. The adze was in my right hand, and the block of cedar was wedged between my knees when she walked out of the tree line and stopped 20 feet from my fire. I didn't move, not right off. You learn after enough years on the frontier that the first thing you do when something unexpected walks into your light is nothing at all. Let it tell you what it is. She was maybe 25. Blanket pulled close, not for warmth. It wasn't that cold yet, first week of October, the kind of nights where the air just gets honest. She was using it for cover. Her left arm was held strange, close to her ribs, and I could see even at that distance she'd been walking hard. The bottoms of her moccasins were worn through on the right foot, the sole flapping loose on the forward step and catching on the back one. I set the adze down on the log beside me, slow, then put both hands where she could see them. "I've got coffee," I said, "and I'm not going to ask you anything until you've had some." She stood there another 10 seconds, then she came toward the fire. That was the fall of 1871. I was 43 years old. I'd been running freight between Fort Laramie and the settlements up near the Black Hills for 11 years, and I'd been doing it alone for the last 4, since my partner Aldous Crane caught a Sioux arrow in the neck during a misunderstanding that wasn't really a misunderstanding at all. We'd strayed where we shouldn't, and we paid the price of that ignorance. I paid less than Aldous did. Her name was Wichapi Chantechiapi. I couldn't say it right for weeks. The closest I got when I tried was something like Wichapi Chantechiapi, and she'd tilt her head just slightly when I said it, not correcting me, just letting me hear myself. Eventually, I stopped mangling it in conversation and started calling her Star in my head, because that's what the first part of her name meant, star, heart's longing. And because I am not a man given to poetry, but even I understood that what she carried inside that name was not small. She told me her story in pieces. Not that first night. That first night she drank the coffee and ate the hardtack and the cold venison I had left from supper, and she slept with her back to a tree 6 feet from my fire, and I slept where I always slept, in my bedroll under the wagon, and in the morning she was still there. I want to be honest about what I felt when I saw her still there. I felt, I don't know exactly, something settled, like a gate latch dropping into place. The arm was the first thing. She'd taken a bad fall crossing a creek, she said, or I understood that from the mime of it, since my Lakota was not yet good enough for the explanation. The elbow was swollen, not broken I thought, but strained hard, the kind where the bone bruises deep and it aches for weeks. I had a linseed poultice in my kit that I'd been carrying for a horse injury that never happened, and I used it on her arm instead, and she held still for that with a patience that told me she'd endured worse things than a stranger wrapping her elbow. Her story came in the next 3 days because we were traveling the same direction. I was bound for a trading post at Chalk Creek. She was going away from something, which is its own kind of direction. She rode on the wagon seat beside me and I drove, and we talked around the facts of her situation, the way you circle a campfire to find the side without smoke. What I came to understand was this. Her father had been hung papa, a man of standing, a headman in his band, which I won't name because the names are not mine to use here. Her mother had been white, a woman taken in a raid 14 years before, who had not wanted to be taken and had not wanted to stay, but who had stayed because the choice had been made for her, and who had eventually, in the way people do when survival is the only game available, built something like a life. Star had been born of that life. Not quite belonging to either world, which is a condition I am somewhat familiar with, having grown up between a Scots-Irish father who drank himself to sleep every night and a Quaker mother who prayed herself to sleep every morning, and neither of them particularly fond of the middle ground where I lived. The trouble had started with a man named Vickers. I knew of Vickers, a land agent operating out of Cheyenne, the kind of man who wore good boots and bad faith. He wanted grazing rights that her father controlled and her father wouldn't sell, and Vickers was not a man who understood the word no in any language. So he found someone to write a letter to the Indian agent at the fort claiming that Starr's father was harboring a captive white woman against her will, the captive being her mother, who by that point had been with the hung papa for 14 years and had not expressed any particular desire to be anywhere else. The Indian agent, who was young and ambitious and afraid of making mistakes, sent soldiers. The soldiers came to the wrong camp first, and there was shooting, and 2 men died, and then they found the right camp and there was more trouble, and by the time it was sorted out, Starr's father had been taken to the fort for questioning, and her mother, who had no English any more to speak of, and who was terrified of white men with guns, had been removed to a mission outside Deadwood, where she subsequently died of typhoid within the year. Her father came back from the fort, but the band was different after. There were men in it who blamed the mixed-blood girl for drawing the soldiers, which makes no sense if you think about it, and makes perfect sense if you don't want to think and just want someone convenient to blame. There had been pressure. Not open hostility, her father's position protected her from that, but the cold kind. The kind that wears you down like weather. And then her father had died, fever in the spring. And after that the protection was gone, and the cold had gotten colder, and a young warrior who had wanted Starr and been refused, had told the band that she had written the letter herself, had told the Indian agent about her own mother. And she couldn't have. She didn't know how to write a letter in English. But it didn't matter because by then the men who wanted to believe it needed something to be true, and they made it true by believing it hard enough. She had left before they made it any harder. So that's what I was carrying in my wagon for those 3 days to Chalk Creek. Not just a woman with a bad elbow and worn-through moccasins, a woman whose own people had unmade her name, who had been erased. I thought of it in those terms even then, though I don't know why that particular word came to me. Erased from the story the way you black out a line of ink you've decided is wrong. We pulled into Chalk Creek on a Thursday afternoon. Now, I want to tell you about Chalk Creek because it matters what kind of place it was. It was the kind of settlement you get when men follow money and necessity out into the territory and drag the bones of civilization along with them. There was a trading post run by a man named Errol Potts, who was fair and stout and honest in the way that men who depend on repeat business tend to be honest. There was a smithy, a saloon that doubled as a rooming house, a church that had been built before there were enough Christians to fill it and hadn't filled since. And there were about 40 permanent residents and maybe 120 souls drifting through at any given time. Freighters, prospectors, a few families trying to set themselves up on land that the government was just beginning to gesture towards selling. I drove the wagon up to Potts's loading dock and climbed down, and Starr climbed down on the other side, and that was when Chalk Creek noticed her. I am going to be plain about what I saw on people's faces, because I think you deserve the truth of it. Most of what I saw was wariness. Some of it was curiosity. A good portion of it was the particular kind of blankness that men put on when they're deciding something and they don't want you to see them deciding. And from 2 men standing outside the saloon, a man named Fitch and his younger brother, whose name I never caught and didn't need to, what I saw was something uglier. A sort of appetite that had nothing to do with welcome. I unloaded my freight and settled with Potts and arranged for the wagon to be stored in the linta behind the post, all of which took about an hour. Starr waited by the wagon. She didn't sit. She stood. I noticed she stood with her back to the wagon wheel, so she couldn't be approached from behind. When I was done with Potts, I went back to her and I said, "I'm going to go have a meal at the saloon. You should come." She looked at me a moment. She had dark eyes that I'd been trying not to look at directly because they had a way of making me feel like I was being read, and I didn't particularly want to be a book anyone had opened without my permission. "They will stare," she said. "I know," I said. "Come anyway." She came. What happened in that saloon, I'm going to tell you slowly, because it's worth telling slowly. We sat at a table near the back. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I prefer to have a wall behind me. Old habit from years on the trail. And I ordered the stew and cornbread that was the only hot food being offered. And I ordered it for both of us without asking whether she wanted it because I was fairly sure she was hungry, and had been for days, and sometimes you just act without turning it into a conversation. The staring was as she'd predicted. I've been stared at myself, not for the same reasons, but I know the specific quality of a room that's watching you while pretending not to, and I know how to eat in that room without giving it anything. I ate. She ate. She ate like someone who had been rationing herself, and had decided that was over now, methodical and steady, and she cleaned the bowl. Fitch came over halfway through. He was a big man, not fat but large, the kind of large that gets comfortable being large because people have been making way for it since it was young. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat in it without being invited. "Didn't know you were running a different kind of cargo these days, Harlan," he said. "My name is Harlan Reeves. I've been called worse things." "I run freight," I said. He looked at Star. She was looking at her bowl. "Where's she from?" "She's from here," I said. "She's with me." He waited to see if there was more. There wasn't. "That right," he said. "That's right," I said. Now, I want to be honest about something. I wasn't a young man with something to prove. I was 43 years old, and I had been in enough bad situations to know that bravado is expensive, and most men who rely on it can't afford the price. So what I said to Fitch was not a performance. It was a statement of fact that I intended to back up with whatever was required to back it up. Something in how I said it must have carried that. Fitch sat there another moment, looking at me, and I looked back, and then he pushed the chair out and stood up and went back to his brother. Star looked up from her bowl. "You know him," she said. "I know what he is," I said. She went back to eating. I found her a room that night at the back of the rooming house. Mabel Crane, who ran the place, was a practical woman who'd seen enough of the frontier to be unsentimental about who she rented to, and the frontier had seen enough of her that she developed the kind of authority that makes argument feel exhausting. Mabel rented Star the room. I paid for 2 weeks. "That your woman?" Mabel asked me not unkindly when Star had gone upstairs. "She's someone who needed somewhere to be," I said. Mabel made the sound that women of a certain experience and age make when a man says something that is technically true but doesn't quite cover the territory. It's not a dismissive sound. It's more like the sound of someone filing something away. I wasn't staying in Chalk Creek. I had a run to make back to Laramie and then another one north, and I had a schedule to keep. But I didn't leave the next morning. I told myself it was because the near wheel on the wagon needed its hub repacked, and that was true, it did. But Jeb Aldridge, who worked the smithy, could have done it in 2 hours, and I didn't take it to Jeb Aldridge. I repacked it myself, which took most of the morning, and then I found other things to do in the afternoon, and by evening I hadn't gone anywhere. I saw Star 3 times that day. Once in the morning outside the trading post where she was looking at bolts of cloth she couldn't afford. Once at midday when she was talking to Mabel Crane's youngest, a girl of about 8 who had attached herself to Star with the specific devotion that children sometimes develop for a person who seems to them both beautiful and not dangerous. And once in the late afternoon when I came around the corner of the post, and she was sitting on a barrel with a short knife and a piece of pine in her hand, carving. I stopped. "What are you making?" I said. She held it up. It was rough yet, a few minutes' work, but I could see the shape of a bird in it. A hawk or an eagle, the wings just suggested. "Who taught you that?" I said. "My father," she said. There was something in how she said it. Not grief exactly. Something more hardened than grief, the place grief goes when it's had time to set. I went back to the wagon, and I thought about that carving for the rest of the afternoon, and I couldn't have told you why. I stayed 3 days in Chalk Creek. On the 4th day I was ready to go, and I knew it, and I was standing by the wagon in the early morning. The cold had sharpened overnight, that October bite that tells you winter is not far behind it. And Star came out of the rooming house with her blanket and her saddlebag, and she stopped in front of me. "Where are you going?" she said. "Back to Laramie," I said, "then north." She nodded slowly. I looked at her, she looked at me. "You could come," I said. "I can use someone who can handle a team and doesn't talk too much." She looked at the wagon, then at me again. "I talk," she said. "Not too much," I said. She thought about it, or she was doing something that looked like thinking about it. I had the sense that she'd already made up her mind before she came out this morning, and the pause was something else, some kind of assessment or settling. "All right," she said. That's how it started, practical, plain, no speeches. And now I need to tell you about the months that followed because they're the ones that matter, and I'm not going to rush them. She was good with the team. Better than good, she had a way with horses that I have seen in maybe 4 people in my life, the kind where the horse just accepts you, where something in how you move and hold yourself tells the animal that you are not a threat, and you know what you're doing and it can relax. The horses relaxed around her. I noticed I relaxed around her too, eventually, though that took longer. Her English improved fast. She'd had some from her mother, buried and unused for years, and it came back like creek water after a dry spell, slow at first and then quicker and quicker. She also began, in quiet moments on the wagon bench, to teach me Lakota, not formally. She'd say a word and I'd repeat it and she'd correct me until I had it. And over the weeks a language built up between us piece by piece, the way you lay a road, stone by stone, until one day you look back and realize you've covered ground. I will tell you what she was like to travel with. She never wasted a movement. Watching her work breaking camp, loading the wagon, reading the weather on the horizon was like watching something precise. No extra steps, no fuss. She knew how to make a fire in wet conditions that would have stumped most men I'd ridden with. She could read sign on the trail, animal and human, in a way that saved us twice from situations that could have gone bad. The first time was a stretch of the northern route above the Cheyenne River, where a party of 5 men had been camped for 2 days in a draw just off the road. She saw the smoke of their fire before I did, and she saw the horses, 3 of them tethered back in the timber, away from where you'd put a legitimate camp's horses. She said nothing, just put her hand on my arm, and I felt the pressure of it. I pulled the wagon off the road and we went around the long way, 3 extra hours, and when we came back to the main track on the far side of the draw, I never did find out what those men wanted. But I had my suspicions, and I don't believe the extra 3 hours was wasted time. The load I was carrying was 400 pounds of dry goods and a lockbox of silver coin for the Morrison trading post, and there are men on those roads who know what freighters carry and make their livings accordingly. I've been robbed once in 11 years. After that, I learned to read a campfire, but she read it better and faster than I did, and I was honest enough with myself to say so. The second time was less clear-cut. A Cheyenne hunting party we crossed near the river, 6 men, moving east with 2 elk dressed and packed across their horses. She read the intention in how they rode, not toward us, she said, just past us, and she was right. But she spoke to them, pulled the wagon up and spoke across 100 yards of grass in a language I didn't have enough of yet to follow, and whatever she said they answered, and after a moment they went on east and she clucked the team forward and we went north. "What did you say?" I asked her. "That you were honest freight," she said, "that you could be dealt with." "Could I said. "Yes," she said simply, and didn't say anything more about it. There's a different kind of confidence that comes from knowing you have someone beside you who is watching what you're not watching, reading what you can't read. I don't mean someone to lean on. I mean someone to complete the picture. I'd been doing the North runs for 11 years and I was good at them. With her alongside, I was better, and the routes felt different in a way I didn't fully have language for, less like a man working alone and more like a team running right, each doing what the other couldn't. That's the thing I want you to understand about what she gave me out there on those runs. It wasn't just company. It was competence added to competence. I was good at what I did. She made me better. She made the operation better. She made the decisions better because she knew things I didn't know and told me them plainly, and without making me feel small for not knowing them. There is a particular dignity in that, in being treated as a man capable of learning. I was 43 years old and I was still learning things, and she was the one teaching some of them. And that was not a thing I had expected, and not a thing I was going to pretend hadn't happened. She was quiet in the mornings and more willing to talk by evening, and she never asked me about my personal history and never offered me more of her own than she wanted to. I appreciated that more than I can say. I have spent a lot of my life around people who feel the need to fill silence as though silence itself is a kind of failing. She carved every evening. Whatever wood was at hand, pine, cottonwood, once a piece of hardwood I had as part of a cabinet order. Birds mostly at first, then other things. A horse mid-stride that was so accurate it made me laugh when I first saw it because I'd been looking at a horse all day and here was another one in miniature exactly right. A buffalo, a dog sleeping, a man's hands holding reins. Those last ones I noticed especially. One night, it was maybe 6 weeks in, deep November, we'd camped in a draw out of the wind and the temperature had dropped hard. She was carving and I was mending a harness and she said, without looking up from what she was doing, "My father had a piece of wood, from a tree near our camp. He carved my name in it." I kept working on the harness. "He said a name belongs where it's carved," she said, "not where it's written. Writing can be crossed out. A carving goes into the grain." I thought about that. Your family, the white side, did they know about you? She looked at me then. "My mother had a family in Ohio," she said. "She told me about them. Before she couldn't speak English anymore, she told me. She had a father who was a preacher. She had a Bible. She had brothers and sisters. 2 sisters," she said. "She told me their names. I don't think they ever knew I existed." I turned that over. A girl in Ohio who maybe had a niece out in the Dakotas and didn't know it. A family Bible with a page in it that had never known Star's name. "My father carved mine instead," she said. "The piece of wood is probably gone. With everything else." She went back to carving. I went back to the harness, and the fire popped and settled and the horses shifted in the dark beyond the light. I thought about names a long time after that, about what it means to have one and what it means to have it taken. I thought about my own name, Harlan Reeves, which had been given to me by people who didn't particularly prize what I turned out to be and who had said so fairly regularly, and about whether a name given without love is still a name that belongs to you. I thought it probably was. But I thought it must be something else to have a name given in love, carved into wood, and then have that wood taken too. After the Missouri River crossing, I found a piece of cedar in a lumber load I was hauling to a settlement outside Rapid City. Not the whole log, just a section of it, dense-grained and red-pink inside where I split it, with a smell that I have never found a word for except cedar, which might just be the smell of itself. I kept the section. I didn't say anything about it. I put it under the wagon seat. It took me 3 weeks to work up to it. I am not a man who moves fast on personal matters. But one evening in December I got out my good knife and the section of cedar, and I sat with it, and I thought about the letters and how to cut them clean into the grain, and I started. I'm not a carver. My hands are freight handler hands used to heavy work, but I am precise. I've always been precise. It's the quality that kept me alive in this business, where imprecision costs you a wheel or a load or something you can't get back. I cut slow. I went letter by letter, the Lakota syllabic characters first, the ones she'd shown me on the back of a flour sack as she taught me, going over them with her finger until I had the shapes. Then the English translation below, because I wanted both in there, both parts of what she was. Star watched me do the last half of it. She'd come back to the fire from wherever she'd gone, and she sat down across from me, and she didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything, and I worked until it was done. Then I handed it to her. She held it. She tilted it toward the fire to read it. I watched her face. She didn't cry. She wasn't someone who did that. But there was something that passed across her features, not a change so much as a settling, like something that had been held tense for a long time releasing a degree or two. She ran her thumb along the carved letters. "The Lakota characters aren't quite right," she said. "I know," I said, "the third one especially." "It's close," she said. "I can do it again if you want," I said. "I have more cedar." She looked up at me, and I will tell you what I saw in her face in that moment in the firelight with the snow just beginning beyond the edge of the camp light. It was not gratitude exactly, though that was in there. It was something more like recognition, like I had become, in that moment, real to her in a way I had not quite been before. Or she to me. I'm not sure I can separate the two. "No," she said, "this one." She put it in her bag, carefully, the way you put something away that you intend to keep. I went back to the fire and I stoked it up against the cold, and I didn't look at her because something had shifted and I didn't want to press on it, whatever it was, not yet. We spent the winter running shorter routes out of Laramie. The big northern runs were impossible from December on, the passes closed, and the weather got murderous, and I was not young enough anymore to be heroic about weather. I had a small place, a 2-room cabin about 8 miles east of Laramie that I used as a base when I wasn't on the trail, and Star wintered there with me. Which sounds simpler than it was, given that 2 people who have been living out of a wagon for 3 months are accustomed to a certain amount of space, and a 2-room cabin is not a wagon, but it worked. It worked because we had both, in our different ways, become used to making things work with what was available. She fixed the place up. Not decoration, practical things. A better latch on the door that kept out the draft. A shelf that I'd been meaning to build for 2 years. She cured a deer hide and made a second set of curtains for the window in the main room that kept the cold air from the glass. Small things, done without announcement, that improved the quality of the days. I cooked. I am a decent camp cook and a passable indoor one, and I didn't mind the work. She carved. Through January and February, she carved more than I'd ever seen her carve. The cedar block she'd cut pieces from had traveled with us, and there were always shavings on the floor by the chair she'd claimed, and there were always small finished pieces on the sill, and the shelf, and the table. The evenings in that cabin had a particular quality I have tried to describe to people and never quite managed. Not quite exactly. The stove talked and the wind talked, and the horses shifted in the lean-to and the wood popped, but settled in a way that I had not felt in a long time. I would read, or mend gear, or go over the route maps for the spring runs, and she would carve, and the lamp was between us and we could go an hour without speaking, and there was nothing uncomfortable in that hour. I have spent a lot of hours not speaking with a lot of people, and the silence is usually one thing or another, tense or bored or careful. That silence was none of those. It just was. 2 people not needing to fill it. I noticed that some of the carvings she left on the sill and the shelf were of me. Not labeled, not obvious, but I knew the hands, the shape of them, the particular way the right thumb crooks, which is the result of a rope injury years ago. And once a figure sitting by a fire, just the posture of it, the weight forward, which is how I sit. I didn't say anything about it. In February, there was trouble from Laramie. Word had spread, as word does, on the frontier, with the particular enthusiasm that news about a man's private life always seems to generate, that Harlan Reeves was wintering with an Indian woman out at his place. This produced 2 things. The first was that Errol Potts stopped by to make sure I was all right, which I appreciated, since it was genuinely intended as concern and not as anything else. The second was that Dunnett, who ran the main freight operation out of Laramie and had been trying to undercut my routes for 3 years, tried to use it as a pretext for convincing the 2 settlement clients we shared to drop my contracts on grounds of I'm struggling to find the word he used exactly. Something about judgment. My judgment. The kind of men you hired needing to reflect the kind of settlement you were building. I found out about this from Errol Potts on one of his supply runs. I drove into Laramie the next morning. I want to tell you what that meeting with Dunnett was like, because it's the kind of thing I don't usually talk about, and it has some bearing on everything after. Dunnett was in his office, a small wood frame building at the edge of town that he'd built to look more important than it was, with a painted sign and a glass window that he was clearly proud of. I went in without knocking, which I do sometimes when I want to establish the terms of a conversation before it's begun. He was a lean man, 50ish, with a careful face. He started to say something welcoming, and I sat down across from him and I said, I want to hear from your mouth what you said to Morrison and to Clive Packard about my contracts. He went careful very fast. He said there had been concerns expressed and he was just relaying them. Whose concerns? I said. The community, he started. I've been running freight in this territory for 11 years, I said. My loads arrive. My loads arrive on time in the condition they left in and at the price I quoted. That's the measure of what I do. The rest is not your business or theirs. There are reputational considerations. The reputation I have, I said, is that I keep my word and I know what I'm doing. If you've said anything to Morrison or Packard that works against that reputation, then you and I are going to have a disagreement that's going to be inconvenient for you. He was quiet for a moment. I don't want trouble with you, Harlan, he said. Then don't start any, I said. I stood up and left, and I will tell you that the satisfaction of that conversation was not in anything dramatic. I hadn't threatened the man, hadn't raised my voice, hadn't done anything except say plainly what I meant. The satisfaction was in knowing that I had built something over 11 years that was worth defending, that what I'd said about my reputation was true, that no man's private interest in my business arrangements could undo what I'd actually done. Morrison kept my contract. Packard, whom I'd known less well, let his go. I found other business. I always found other business. Starr knew something had happened when I came home that evening. I don't know how she knew I hadn't said anything, hadn't come in differently than I usually did, but she looked up from the carving she was working on and she said, Trouble. Dealt with, I said. She went back to carving. After a moment she said, Done it. I looked at her. How did you know? Potts told me, she said, when he brought the flour. I sat down. You didn't say anything, I said. I was going to say, she said, that if you wanted to go into town I would come with you. I thought about that, what it meant that she would have come. That she understood what kind of thing it was, going into that office, and had been prepared to stand beside me doing it. I handled it, I said. I know, she said, and then after a moment, you always do. I have gone over those 3 words many times since then. You always do. It's not a big statement. It's not a declaration of anything. But I know what it is, coming from a woman who does not say things she doesn't mean, who has been watching me for the better part of 5 months with those reading eyes. It is an accounting. It is a verdict. I went to the window and looked out at the dark because I didn't want to be seen just then. Spring came the way it does, slowly and then all at once, the snow pulling back from the south-facing slopes first and then the mud and then the grass following behind it like it was being unrolled. I got the wagon ready for the northern runs. New wheel rims, the harness replaced where it had cracked over winter. Good teamwork, the kind I don't mind. Starr and I had not spoken about what we were to each other. I am 67 years old now, telling you this story, and I understand that what I'm about to say may be difficult for a man of my generation to admit without embarrassment, but I'm going to say it anyway. I was afraid. Not of her, of needing. I had spent 4 years needing no one, which is something you can do if you're willing to be small enough, to want small enough, and I had gotten comfortable with that smallness. She threatened the comfort of it, not deliberately, just by existing in my days the way she did. On the last night of March, the first real warm night of the year, she came outside where I was sitting on the step and she sat beside me, and for a while we didn't talk, and then she took my right hand in both of hers. I looked at her hands holding mine. They were strong hands, her hands, scarred a little from the knife work from the winters. The knuckle of her right index finger had a ridge in it that I'd never asked about and she'd never explained. And I noticed it now the way you notice things you've been seeing for a long time without consciously registering. She didn't say anything, neither did I for a while. Then I said, "I need to tell you something." "All right," she said. "I don't want you to go north with me," I said. She didn't move. "Not because," I started. "Tell me why," she said. "Because if you come north with me on a freight run," I said, "it's the same as always, it's practical, and I don't want it to be practical anymore." She was quiet. "I want you to stay here," I said, "at the house, because it's your house too if you'll have it, and I'll come back, I'll always come back. But I want there to be something to come back to that isn't just a cabin I leave empty." I could feel her looking at me. I didn't look back. I was looking at the dark to the north, the direction the runs went. "Harlan," she said. I looked at her then. "I came out here," she said, "because I wanted to say something to you. I have been trying to say it for a long time." "Say it," I said. She held my hand tighter, just slightly, the way a decision feels when it becomes a grip. "There was a man," she said, "in my band. A good man, a warrior, who asked my father for me before my father died. A man my father liked and who would have been a good match by any measure I had been taught to use." I waited. I said no, she said. "Why?" I said. "Because I had not found a man I could trust entirely," she said. "Not in that way. I had found good men and loyal men and men who were strong, but entirely is a different thing." She looked at me. "You are an entirely kind of man, Harlan," she said. "You don't know that about yourself, but it's true." I didn't say anything for a long moment. I was aware of the night around us, the smell of the thaw in the air, the cedar and mud and cold water smell of a Dakota spring. The horses in the small corral behind the cabin, one of them huffing in the dark. "I'll be here when you come back," she said. We sat there a while longer, her hands around mine, both of us looking at the dark. At some point she leaned against me, her shoulder against my arm, and I didn't move because I didn't want to change anything about it. That's the thing about a good woman making a choice. Not being told to, not being obliged to, not being without options. Choosing, with her eyes open, with her full knowledge of what the choice is, choosing you. It is a thing that can hold a man up for the rest of his life if he lets it. I've let it. I ran the northern routes for another 12 years after that. Always came back. She was always there when I came back, which I do not say as though it was a small thing, because it was not. She built her life at the cabin and around Laramie with the same quiet precision she did everything. A garden, eventually, that was productive in a way I'd never have managed myself. And a name in the territory as a healer, because people found out what she knew about medicines and remedies and started coming to her with their injuries and their sick children and their horses with bad hooves, and she never turned anyone away. Not even the ones who had looked at her cold in that first year. People have a way of revising their opinions when a woman saves their child's life at 2 in the morning, without asking to be thanked for it. There was a period, around 1876, when the territory got tense after the Little Bighorn, when life at the cabin became harder. Men in Laramie who had been merely cool to us before became openly hostile. Someone painted words on the front gate of the property that I won't repeat here because they don't deserve to be repeated. There was a stretch of 3 weeks where I didn't go into town without the Winchester on the seat, and where I told Star to keep close to the cabin when I wasn't there. And she did, though I knew it cost her something to be told where to stay. I had to reckon seriously with what I was willing to do and what I wasn't, which is a kind of reckoning that strips a thing down to its core fast. What I wasn't willing to do, move her, pretend she was something other than what she was, apologize for anything we had built, make her smaller so other men could be more comfortable. I said so plainly to the men who thought I ought to consider my position. 2 of those conversations were uncomfortable. One of them required me to be somewhere between persuasive and physical, and I am 67 years old and I am not proud of violence as a rule, but I am not ashamed of that particular instance of it either, because the alternative was to let a man believe he could walk onto my property with that kind of intention and leave unchanged. He left changed. The winter of that year was the hardest one in memory. We were snowed in for 11 days in January, just the 2 of us and the horses and the small tight heat of the stove, and I will tell you that there was nothing bad about those 11 days. There was something almost, I don't have the word for it. Like the storm had narrowed the world to just what was essential, and what was essential was exactly what I had. We came through it. Most of what I was afraid would happen didn't happen, which is the nature of most feared things, and some of what did happen made the ones who were watching for our defeat look away, which is its own kind of victory. Mabel Crane's girl, Clara, the one who'd attached herself to Star that first week in Chalk Creek, used to come and visit in summers, grew into a young woman while we weren't looking, the way they do, and she learned to carve from Star and became good at it. Better than me, certainly. Better than her teacher thought she'd be. The cedar block I'd found in that lumber load outlasted all my predictions of it. Star worked from it for years, small pieces coming off it at a time, the block diminishing slowly like a good long winter. The last thing she made from it was a pair of matched pieces that I still have, a hawk and a figure of a man, the man sitting by a fire, the hawk above him, the 2 carved to be set together on a surface, so the hawk seems to be watching over the man who doesn't know it's there. They sit on the sill above the desk where I'm talking to you now. Between them there's the piece I made for her, the cedar tablet with her name in it, the carved letters a little rough in the Lakota, the English translation below, the grain of the wood running through all of it. She kept it her whole life. When she died, I found it in the cedar box, where she kept the things she didn't want touched. She's been gone 7 years. I'm still in the same cabin. The garden's smaller now, managed by a woman from town who comes twice a week and shakes her head at what I let go fallow, and she's right to shake her head. But the tablet is there. The hawk and the man are there. And on the wall beside the desk there's a small shelf she put up in that first winter, the wood dried and settled now into something permanent, holding a line of the small carved things she made over 30 years of evenings. The name is in the wood where it belongs. Not written, not something anyone can cross out. Carved in, going with the grain the way things stay.